You ever feel like economics is just this huge, super complicated puzzle? Well, today, we're going to make it simple. We are going to break down the entire field into two really powerful ideas, the magnifying glass and the telescope. All right, let's jump right in.
So, here's the game plan. We'll start with the biggest question in all of economics. Then we'll zoom in with our magnifying glass on something called microeconomics. After that, we'll pull way back with the telescope to see the big picture with macroeconomics, show you how they fit together, and finally, we'll get into why any of this actually matters to you.
Okay, so let's get started with the one question that really kicks off this entire field of study. And honestly, it's a question you probably ask yourself in some way every single day.
I mean, just think about it for a second. Your time, your money, the resources to build your phone, all of it is limited. But our wants, yeah, those seem to be pretty much unlimited, right? And that simple, universal problem, that's the absolute heart of economics.
And that brings us to the textbook definition. At its core, economics is the science of choice. It's really just the study of how all of us, you, me, companies, governments, make decisions when we know we can't have it all. It's all about managing that basic tension between what we have and what we want.
Now, to really understand these choices, economists use two different lenses. So first up, let's grab our magnifying glass. We're going to zoom way in to look at the small, individual parts of the economy. This, my friends, is microeconomics. You know, the key word here is individual. Microeconomics couldn't care less about the entire country's economy. It's focused on you, your family, a single business, or maybe one specific market. It's all about the decisions that are made right there on the ground level. So what's it looking at exactly? Well, it's things like, why did you decide to buy that brand of coffee? Or, how does your local pizza place figure out its prices based on who wants pizza and how much it costs to make? All of those are micro-level questions.
And here's a perfect example. A student trying to decide whether to spend their allowance on a video game or on movie tickets. That is a classic microeconomic decision. They're just allocating a scarce resource, their cash, to try and get the most happiness out of it.
And it's exactly the same thing for businesses. When a huge company has to figure out the launch price for a brand new phone, they are swimming in microeconomics. They're looking at what it costs to make, how many people might want it, and what their competitors are up to. It's all about individual choices in one specific market.
Okay, time to put down the magnifying glass and pick up the telescope. We need to zoom out, way out, and look at the whole massive picture. We're talking about the health and performance of the entire economy. And this is macroeconomics.
With macroeconomics, we're not looking at one tree anymore. We're looking at the whole forest. The focus shifts to what they call aggregate variables, which is really just a fancy way of saying totals or averages for the whole economy, like the national income or the overall unemployment rate.
You see this stuff in the news headlines every single day. Is the country's GDP going up or down? What's the latest inflation number? Is the government planning to change taxes? These are the huge economy-wide questions that macroeconomics tries to answer.
A great example of macroeconomics in action is when a government decides to fund a bunch of big construction projects to create jobs all across the country. See, they're not focused on one person or one company. They're using a massive policy tool to try and affect the entire national economy.
So, we've got the magnifying glass of micro and the telescope of macro. But here's the thing, and this is really important. They are not two separate things. They're just two different ways of looking at the exact same economy. And to get the full picture, you absolutely have to have both. This table lays out the difference perfectly, right? You can see micro is all about individual people and companies, dealing with things like price and demand. The goal is to use resources efficiently. Meanwhile, macro is looking at the whole shebang, tracking big picture stuff like GDP, and aiming for overall stability and growth. It's like they're two different tools for the same job, keeping the economy healthy.
And this is exactly how they're connected. Let's say you decide to buy a new car. That's a micro decision. But when millions of people do the same thing, that creates the total demand for cars in the country, and that's a macro trend. The government might see that trend and create a new tax policy. That's a macro move, which then directly influences your next individual decision. See? It's a constant feedback loop.
So, okay, we've got these two lenses, and we see how they're connected. But what does any of this actually mean for you? Why should you care? Well, it turns out you are using these concepts literally every day, whether you realize it or not. Understanding a little microeconomics helps you make smarter choices with your own money and understand why stuff costs what it does. And understanding macroeconomics helps you actually make sense of the news, get what the government is doing with taxes, and see the big forces shaping the job market and the value of your savings.
At the end of the day, it really all comes down to this one powerful idea. Every single, small, individual, micro-level choice, what you buy, where you decide to work, how much you save, it all adds up. And all those little choices, together, create the giant macro-level outcomes for our entire society.
So I'll just leave you with this to think about. When you look at your own life, what's a small choice you make pretty regularly that, if you multiplied it by millions of people, could actually have a really big economic outcome?